Hi, I'm Phyllis Lang, and welcome to Nightwear. This video explains how to use SQM Reader Pro 3. We'll see how to configure it, and how to read data, and how to use the data. Now, if you are a user of a previous version, you'll notice that the user interface is different. That change was made for two reasons. Number one, there are a lot of changes going on in Windows regarding high-resolution displays. And this change was made partially to help ease our way through those changes. The developer tools are changing constantly, and so is Windows. The other reason is that users requested a smaller footprint for the SQM Reader Pro window. So things have been rearranged a bit to accommodate that need. Now, the program as it appears, it looks like a Windows 10 program, but it isn't. It will run on Windows 7 and later. So with those changes and needs in mind, let me explain how the user interface is arranged. First of all, we have one main viewer pane, and in this pane I show the configuration pages and the display output pages. And all of these things can be reached through the main menu. Now the main menu can be turned on and off with a click of the main menu button. So once you have your configuration settings made and you're running a data acquisition session, you can click the main menu button and use all the screen space for an output page. So again, this is a toggle. These menu items are a direct linkage to the configuration pages and the output pages. These two buttons at the bottom of the main menu allow you to open a readings file and process it, displaying the data in the usual display pages. And this button allows you to save all the configuration settings, which is always done at the end of the program run when you shut down the program. But if you want to save the configuration settings on demand, you can click this button. Now, the command panel is up in this area now. It used to be in the center of the window that divided the configuration pages between the display pages. So now it's at the top of the window. We have read, which is pretty self-explanatory, stop reading, pause reading, reset all the displayed data, and the status of a data acquisition run. We also have some new command buttons for data logger meters, and I'll explain that later. The other main button in the command panel is the help button, and you can see these various functions that have to do with help, your licensing, checking the website for software updates, checking into the community page, and looking at the readings map online. So again, this is a toggle, and we can click it to close that menu. So with that, let's begin to investigate the configuration pages. The meter configuration page is really the most fundamental of the configuration pages because we need to set up the communication parameters for your meter. The first thing we need to choose is the model because that dictates which communication settings are needed and will be used. So we can choose the Ethernet or the serial meters and even the data logger meter. For this demonstration, we'll use the USB meter. We can set the serial port settings here. If we're using Ethernet, we can set those settings here. The Find buttons allow you to poll your system and find any connected sky quality meters. And the Test Meter Connection button will allow you to actually acquire the serial number from the meter, which will establish that you do or do not have the communication settings set properly. So we click that and we have found a USB meter. So the last thing we need to do on this page is establish where the meter is installed. Latitude, longitude, elevation, and importantly, the time zone offset. Now, you need to enter this in manually. You can acquire that information from Windows itself. The important thing here, though, is that there's no automatic change for daylight saving time. So if you are using daylight saving time, you'll need to come in and make a manual change. The next page is the data collection page, and this determines whether you read on demand once or automatically, which is continuous. So if we set continuous, we are now allowed to describe how often the automatic reading should be taken, and we have a new feature which allows this to be aligned to the clock, and by that we mean aligned to a multiple of the continuous read cycle against the hour. So in this case, with 1 minute set, aligned with clock would read at the top of each minute. The other thing is that we have some new settings with suspending collection. We can stop collecting data if the sun is above the horizon, or if we are above the horizon, or during one of the different twilight settings. These twilight settings are dictated by the actual number of degrees that the sun is below the horizon. So if you really want to go for the darkest of these twilight settings, astronomical twilight is the one to choose. The other setting here is if you care to do time averaging. So time averaging allows you to accumulate several readings before a data point is graphed. So this allows you to smooth out variations. For example, perhaps you want to read every minute and make your averaging period every 5 minutes. So your graph will show 5-minute data, but each data point will be an average of 5 readings. So in order to disable that, we need to set the averaging back to 0. So that is how you'll configure the automatic or singular data collection. Your data graph is an important item. You can set the usual title, the data density per graph page. You can also calculate the number of data points that will be plotted given your data collection settings. Now, this obviously could change. If you have set your collection up to stop at sunset or at the end of one of the twilight settings, then the number of data points per day will change. So you may need to revisit this fairly frequently. The other settings on the page allow you to invert the graph. Perhaps you would rather see the darker readings at the bottom of the graph. The default is to show them at the top because those are larger values. You can toggle on and off the moon's altitude, and you can set these labels according to how much data you're showing on your graph. It gives you a little bit of flexibility on how many labels you'll see. And we do have some color settings for the graph. In looking at a graph, you can see the larger values are at the top, the smaller values at the bottom. The inversion takes effect immediately and inverts the graph. You can see that the moon is plotted in the graph. That can be toggled. And labels for the data points can be eliminated if you need it, and the time can be eliminated. The next configuration page is data storage, and this allows you to configure what files will be generated during your data acquisition session. You can save the readings information in text files, and you can choose to store nothing. You can save everything into a single file and this folder location and file name. You can also automatically generate the file names so that your readings are accumulated per day, and that's from midnight to midnight, or they can be accumulated during an astronomical day, which runs from noon to noon. So in either of these two cases, you would choose a folder and put that here. The other thing you can do is to store a screen grab, essentially, of the readings panel or one of the graphs. And you can save these to your local hard drive, and you can send those to an FTP server, but we'll get to that capability in a moment. One other thing I should mention: when one of the menu items has a non-default setting in it, you'll see that the check mark will appear, and that helps to give you a visual cue that something is configured on that page. You can see that nothing is configured currently on the SkyGlow storage page, but the data storage page does have something configured. So that becomes a very helpful little visual cue for you to know what is not in a default setting. Moving on to the SkyGlow storage page. The SkyGlow storage page allows you to configure data acquisition storage to a SkyGlow format file rather than the default native SQM Reader Pro format. You can, of course, store data in both formats if you wish. But the important thing about the SkyGlow format is that it is an international standard file format, so that if you record your data in those files, you can share this data with other researchers. There are online repositories for these readings, and you can contribute these readings to all types of research: astronomical research, biological research, etc. So in order to set up your SkyGlow file format, you need to enable storage of your data. You need to fill out each of these data items, and they are described in the help file. So I won't go into the details here, but you should set all this, because these make your data files in SkyGlow format meaningful to other researchers. The measurement direction has got to do with where your meter is pointed. SQM Reader Pro currently doesn't support anything other than pointed at the zenith. And you have some comment areas you can fill in here. For this demonstration, I've just noted that the meter is in my office. And in fact, as we look at test data, we'll see that that test data was acquired in a drawer in my office, a very dark place. The Send Data page allows you to configure how you will share the data as the data is being acquired. This is different from acquiring all the data into a file and sharing that later. So in real time, we can send data to an FTP site if we like. You can configure the FTP settings here, and you can test the setting, and you can define which files you will be sending to the FTP server after each reading is acquired. You can send the text file or any of the JPEG images. So again, you can test your FTP connection here to establish that it is the correct setting. The other area we can change, or configure rather, is whether you contribute readings to the Sky Quality Meter readings map page at the Nightwear website. You can check this box to have readings sent automatically to the website, and you can test that connection. You can also turn on the logging of errors. Now, if you're trying to send a reading to the Nightwear readings map and there's an error of some type, it'll show down in the show log page. If you don't want to see any of those errors, you can clear this check. Now, you can review the Sky Quality Meter readings map page directly from SQM Reader Pro. You can click Readings Map, and that will open your default browser to the Readings Map page and show you that page in your browser. So I'll take a quick look at the Readings Map page. Here it is online. And here's the Readings Map as it appears today. There's a couple of other interesting things about contributing readings to the map. First of all, if you acquire a reading when the sun is up, it will not show up on the readings map. The other thing is that you probably have noticed, if you have contributed readings in the past, that when you look at your marker on this map, it isn't exactly accurate. That's because the server is adding a small fudge factor to the location of your meter, and that's so that the exact location of your meter is obscured. And this can be disabled. You can send an email to Nightwear and we'll disable that feature. But the thinking is that by showing an accurate representation of where your meter is, a criminal could find your meter and destroy your equipment. So the exact location of your meter is obscured by a few miles at most. So hopefully that will help you to keep your equipment secure and still get a good feel for the darkness at your observing site. So that brings us to the Process Data page. Process Data allows you to run, after each acquired data reading, a script or a batch file or such to process a file. Now you have to be collecting the file for it to be processed. So the only files that we can process are the text files, the readings text files, or one of the JPEG files, or the SkyGlow file itself. So what happens is your reading is acquired. Each of the processes, send data, storage data, all these things happen, and at the end of the line comes the processing. And Windows needs to start the script processor, which takes a moment, and then run the script. So if you have your readings being acquired every few seconds, there won't be time to do everything. So keep that in mind when you configure a process to be run on each data point acquired. So in the case of the Do Sky Glow BAT file, it's a batch file that simply shows an information box. You obviously will want to do something a little more creative with your reading. Next, we have a new configuration page called Display Options. Some of these settings were present in previous versions, but they've been collected together on a single configuration page. The temperature in degrees centigrade or Celsius, that was there. If we check it, our temperatures are shown in degrees Celsius, and if we uncheck it, Fahrenheit. Show hints will toggle on and off the display of hover hints. When you hover your cursor over any of the controls, there's a hint shown, and if you don't want that, then you can clear that checkbox. Show Atlas Zone is new, and that has to do with the display of the zone box, both here in the latest reading panel and also in the show reading display page. The Atlas Zone depicts a color that corresponds to the darkness of your reading. These colors are defined in the latest Atlas of Artificial Night Sky Brightness. They are used in a number of places, and hopefully they will become a standard representation of the dark quality of your sky. If you do not want to see that, you can toggle that off. And the last thing is Save Program Window State on Close. That's going to be a very obscure setting for people that are switching between monitors that have different DPI settings. Most people will just want to leave that alone. And lastly, and maybe the most important on this page, becomes the style sheet being used for the display of the program window. So the default setting is this gray scheme called Slate Classico. Now, if you are sending JPEG images to an FTP site, you may want to select a different style so that the JPEG colors go better with your website scheme. So there are several styles available to you. Several are very dark in nature. Some are a medium tone by nature, and some are very, very light. So which one you choose probably will be personal preference along with what looks best with your website scheme. So again, the Slate Classico setting is the default. So we'll do this, this demonstration with the default setting. The output menu items are in this area on the main menu. And you can see that we have no data loaded at the minute. So we'll use the Open button to load some data. And what has happened is all the readings in that file have been loaded in as a single sample. This is the reading that is the last reading in the file. And the sample statistics are accumulated here. And then the graphs I'll show in a moment. But I wanted to spend another moment with the zone color box. And the zone color appearing here and in the latest reading panel correspond to a reading of 21.2 magnitudes per square arc second. And this color mapping is defined in the New World Atlas of Artificial Sky Brightness. Now this came out a year or so ago, and it is an update to the previous Atlas. New data has been added to the Atlas, and new results therefore are available. Here is a picture of the United States. Pictures of every region in the world are available. But important to this conversation is the mapping of the colors. And here's how it was laid out as the atlas was devised by the researchers. So the color assignments in SQM Reader Pro come from this particular study. So going back to SQM Reader Pro, we can see that the green box appears for this particular value. We can click Show MP SAS to have a look at a full page of the readings. The blue diamonds are the readings themselves, and you can hover your cursor to get the value and the exact time when the reading was acquired. The yellow circles represent the moon, and again you can hover your cursor over these symbols to get the exact information. And otherwise you can scroll the graph. Now this only has one page of graph information, so scrolling isn't going to work, but you can use these buttons to scroll the graph if there are more than one page. And the phase of the moon at the time of the last reading depicted on the graph will show up here. So there's a very similar graph available for naked eye limiting magnitude, and all this is a computed conversion from the magnitude per square arcsecond value to the naked eye limiting magnitude value. The times and so forth are the same. And then the final output page is the log page. If there are any errors or any comments that are generated by the system for your sample, they will appear here. And you'll know that there's something in the log when this exclamation point symbol shows up. So that is the output description. And then the last thing we need to do is talk about the actual data acquisition commands, which appear here. Read will initiate the reading sample, whether it's a single sample or an automatic sampling over time. You need to click Stop to instantly stop the reading sampling period. Once you initiate an automatic reading sampling period, the pause button is enabled, and you can click pause to temporarily suspend reading, and then you can click reset at any time to clear all the readings in your sample. So you should probably be very careful with the reset button. This box will show you whether there's nothing going on, which is the case now. We have idle, or it may say reading. It may say waiting for the sun to go down to begin reading. Any of those are possible. I want to move on to the data logger functions that have been added to SQM Reader Pro 3. If you have one of these meters, you know that it can record readings in onboard memory without being attached to a computer. But the readings in the memory can be downloaded now into SQM Reader Pro 3, and you can store the readings into files. There are also some configuration and maintenance functions in SQM Reader Pro 3. Now for the lowest level, most detailed support, you still need to use the Unihedron Device Manager for very detailed configuration and troubleshooting procedures. But the support within SQM Reader Pro 3 encompasses two areas. One is the configuration page, and two is the periodic maintenance and reading phase. I'll go first into the configuration of the meter, and then we'll talk about the periodic reading and maintenance function. So the first thing I need to do is select the data logger model on the meter page so that we will have access to the data logger functions. So when I choose the data logger meter, the read all function is enabled, which is the periodic maintenance and reading function. And you'll notice that the data logging configuration page is enabled. So I have the model selected, and now I'd like to be sure that I have the correct serial settings to reach that meter. So I'm going to try the find SQM command. That polls the system for serial connected meters, and we found one at COM7. So I'll change the serial port setting to COM7, and I'll test that connection, and the connection is complete. So now we have access to the data logger meter via the USB cable. So, going to the configuration page, we have a number of settings available. We can click Show Status to interrogate the meter and see how the data logging capability is configured. So I'll do that, and we can see the serial number, the date and time keeping in the meter, how much data is in the meter log, how much room there is with the current logging configuration settings. And we have the external battery. Now, since my meter is plugged into the USB cable and not into the external battery, this 5.1 volt reading is not accurate for the USB connection. If you're connected to the battery, of course, you can't interrogate the meter. So, the other individual functions available on this page. You can erase every reading in the meter by clicking this, and you will have to confirm that request. And so I don't really want to do that right now, so I'll click No. We can set the real-time clock in the meter. We can interrogate the time by clicking Get Clock. And I can change the date and the time to a manual setting and set it. Or I can click Sync Clock, and that will take the PC time and send it directly to the meter. And this becomes one of the functions that can be done at your periodic maintenance and reading function visit. We can set up the logging schedule in the meter and determine what the logging schedule is in the meter. So in order to retrieve the logging schedule, I can click the Get Logging Schedule button. It is currently configured to record every 5 minutes, and it should be recorded every 5 minutes following the top of the hour. So what that means is that at 5-minute intervals starting at the top of the hour, a reading is recorded. And of course it will begin when you put the meter on battery power at the next 5-minute boundary. So if you were to put the meter into operation on battery at 7 minutes past the hour, the first logged reading should happen at 10 minutes past the hour, because 10 minutes is an even multiple of 5 minutes. The other thing we can do is to set a minimum light setting before readings are recorded. And this is useful if you want to stop recording data during daylight hours. So you can set a limit for a data reading and only record those readings that are darker, meaning larger values than what you specify here. If you want to ignore the darkness value reading, go ahead and set it to 0. And then once you've configured your logging schedule, you can click Set Logging Schedule. Now, that takes care of the configuration settings for your meter. But as I mentioned, there is a maintenance function that is designed, and that's the Read All feature. The Read All feature can do three things at a visit to the meter. It can read all the data in the log, and it will do that anytime you click Read All. Once it has read the entire log, it will try to synchronize the real-time clock if the real-time clock is out of tolerance by the number of seconds that you set here. You will be asked to confirm whether you want to set the time. And the final thing that can happen at your periodic visit to the meter is to have all the data in the log erased. Now you want to be careful with this one because you don't want to erase the readings until they have been acquired. So you will be asked to confirm that you want to erase all the readings if this particular item is checked. If it's not checked, the system won't even try to erase any records and it won't ask you. So with that said, we can have a look at the Read All function itself. Now, I can click this to begin reading, but this will not direct the readings to a file. It will only load them in memory so that you can review the data in the graph or the reading panel and so on. If you want to save the data in a file, you'll need to set it up using the data storage page, and this has already been described, or the SkyGlow storage page, which has also been described. But keep in mind that the readings acquired with Read All will not go into a file unless you configure it to do so. So for this demonstration, I'm going to turn off the saving of data to files. And instead, I'm going to go and read all the data from the onboard memory in the meter. Now, this can be a fairly slow process depending on how much data you have in your meter. There's not a lot in this meter at the moment, so it will be rather quick. If you need to interrupt the process and stop it, there is a cancel button that will become active once the reading process begins. So I'll click Read All, and we have a progress bar that shows how much of the data has been read. So generally this will take a bit of time for this to fill to green, and you can click cancel anytime during the reading. Since there's not much data in the meter at the moment, it has already completed reading, and I am now being asked to confirm whether I want to erase all the readings, and I'm going to elect to leave the readings in the meter this time. Now I'm being asked to confirm whether I want to change the real-time clock. So the current error in the PC clock compared to the meter clock is only 1 second. So I can go ahead and synchronize the times, and that concludes my periodic visit to the meter. Of course, I can look at the readings in the meter, and if I think that these look like what I expected, and perhaps I have saved them to a file, then I can go back to the logging configuration page, and I can go ahead and erase all the readings. So, you can configure all this to operate however you want it to. The periodic reading and configuration function is really designed based on my experience in the electric power metering business. I worked in that industry for a number of years, and it was quite normal to arrange several features to be automatically processed when the meter was visited. The data was acquired and a few maintenance functions might be conducted. So this is the same type of notion if you're visiting a meter periodically, maybe you can automatically do a few things to the meter at each visit, and it simplifies your usual maintenance visits. So that's all for the data logging functions in SQM Reader Pro 3. Thanks for watching.